what every digital marketer should know about privacy. Now, like all good fun presentations, fun disclaimer, I am not providing legal advice as I am not an attorney. So let's just dive into the fun now. How to be a savvy digital marketer in today's ever-flowing sea of privacy laws. That's what we're going to cover and dive on in. Apple's in the news a lot this week, as I'm sure you know. And if we begin to kind of understand where privacy and Apple intersect, a significant reason for that is because Apple views privacy as a fundamental human right and is at the core of everything that they do. Now, what's also important to understand is that in the EU, they also define privacy as a fundamental human right. I will spare you the singing, though I actually do like to sing. And as Billy Joel says, it's a matter of trust. And I love this phrase because I think it connects so well with what we're here trying to do when it comes to connecting with our customers. We're trying to get them to trust us, to buy our product and service. And we're going to explain all the fabulous features. Well, from a privacy point of view, that's actually the same thing. When that person buys from us, they're also trusting us with their data. They're trusting that they're going to get the good product and service that we've communicated, and they trust that we're going to deliver an amazing customer service experience as well. So why does privacy matter? Well, a variety of different places. I've emphasized kind of the customer part, whether you're B2C or B2B. Potentially, if you're B2B, you might be a vendor, you might be a service provider, or if you're familiar with the EU, you might be a processor. And in that situation, everyone's asking you to comply with these different laws. So it matters for you to be able to get the sale, because if you don't comply, you don't explain what you're doing, I've seen time and time again that the sale doesn't happen. And I'm actually working right now with several private equity firms on their diligence for a couple M&A activities. And we're looking at the potential acquisition. Well, how do they comply with the privacy laws? What is their privacy and security evaluation? And what they do, how will that be impacted by the current or future privacy laws? So the emphasis of the business is now intertwined with privacy. And often I hear, well, it's kind of overwhelming, or I'm so confused because there's so many different laws. I'm not really sure where to start. We all have limited resources, whether it's people or time and understanding. So with that being said, we're going to walk through how marketing and privacy work together, a bit of where we are today, some common misperceptions, and then what we as digital marketers can do about it and set you up with a plan to go forward. If you have any questions, please drop them in the question chat. We will leave some time at the end to answer them. So what are some examples of marketing and privacy working together? And I thought I would share a couple examples. One is where I was working with a client and they're creating a website and data was going to be shared with a third party. So Jodi would come along, I'd enter some information in, and then I would get something kind of in exchange and it's going to the third party. The third party is going to get to use it for a purpose. And ultimately, we didn't want to be caught in CCPAs, the California Consumer Privacy Act. We didn't want to get caught in their definition of sale. So what did we do? Well, we added a checkbox to make sure that it was consumer directed, that Jodi knew I was sharing the data with the third party. And of course, we had the privacy notice link in the footer. And so by doing those simple things and by thinking about it first, before it went out, we were able to review, identify which privacy law would be in scope, and make any changes that needed to happen. In another situation, I had a company reach out and say, I really want to re-engage. I want to connect with the people who have opted out of receiving our marketing emails, but they're still customers of our organization. They just don't really want our emails anymore. What can we do? Well, we identified space on their regular website where they could share valuable content. There is a very fine balance. You have to be extremely careful. But if you are to look at kind of the transactional email, you can sort of push them back to a regular website and again, be able to share valuable content to re-engage them, to have them opt back in to receive the content. So we kind of created a little bit of a new campaign, always making sure and taking into consideration where these customers were and making sure that we were staying in compliance with the applicable privacy laws. But just because a customer opts out does not mean that you're forever done with them. And there are some creative solutions to be able to find a way to reconnect with them. So, with that being said, a little bit of kind of where are we today and why do we have all these privacy laws that we need to be talking about? Well, put yourself in the shoes of the customer, and we're going to go on a little bit of a journey. Now, in some parts of the country, some of you might be able to do some of these tasks a little bit more freely these days than others. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's full on traffic. People are going everywhere. So kind of imagine when you went and left your house and maybe you stopped at the coffee shop to get some coffee and you dropped maybe a kid off at school. Maybe you went to an office for work, went out to get something to eat, went to the gym, came back home, flipped on your TV, your fancy Alexa. Maybe you have a smart appliance, and that's kind of your day. And through that entire process, we're being tracked. Now, if I said that someone was behind you the whole time, taking notes, marking everything that you're doing and what you ate exactly, like you got the Starbucks regular latte with the caramel flavoring. Oh, and you went to this school and you got that for lunch. You'd probably turn around and say, what on earth are you doing? You're stalking me. Why are you doing that? But that's actually what we do online because we can track everything. And so the philosophy has been, let's track it all and analyze it. And I'm sure we'll come up with a way to utilize the data. Kind of interesting fun fact. I'm sure this has happened to many of you, and you might even be some brands in the audience doing this. I received an email the other day. I was interested in something. I clicked on it, read. I wasn't interested in buying it. I just wanted to learn more. But then a couple hours later, I got an email that said, oh, that product you're looking for, it's still there. Don't you want to get it? 2 days later, because I had another plugin, that plugin kind of said, hey, you're not done shopping. Your thing's still in your cart. Don't you want it? That is all tracking. And some people are okay with that, and some people aren't. And so 3 in 10 users are deploying ad blocking software. 3 in 10. 39% of people are going to walk away if you're going to ask them for highly personal data and they don't feel warm and fuzzy about it. And you can see here, kind of in the high to mid 30s, we have a percentage of people who feel like data security and privacy should be core values. They want to be able to choose and have control over their data. And when you add all that up together, plus you start to realize that 8 in 10 adults are concerned about how companies collect data on them. Only 10% of people are trusting consumer package companies. And half of Americans are concerned about their data. Put all that up together in a big melting pot, and you realize that privacy is on the minds of the people that we're talking to. It's not only about our fabulous products and services that we want people to buy, but we need to convince them and get them comfortable that we care about their data, that we're going to protect their data from a data breach. But it's not only a data breach, it's also how the information's being used. Are we sharing it with anyone? Are we selling it? Are we using it in a way to create a marketing message that has my very formal definition of scratch your head test? Are they going to be confused by it? Now, what happens if you choose not to comply with either a privacy law or just what our customers might expect? Privacy laws have fines. We know that many companies will only listen if there's kind of a cost associated with it. There's a data breach. Threat actors are continuing and will, it's a thriving and booming industry, to keep going after companies. And a lot of times there's a misconception on the smaller companies where, oh, I'm too small, I have nothing interesting. And there's a long list of reasons why that is not true. So if you're a small company listening, you are also in the line of opportunity for a threat actor to take advantage of you. But at the same time, we have loss of sales and loss of trust. I know people who will not buy from a company. We just saw on the other slides the statistics, but I've seen it time and again with my clients where they won't be able to close the sale unless they can prove the privacy and security measures that their customers need to be able to close that deal, especially in the B2B side, but very true sometimes on the B2C side. We are not going to go heavy, and this is not a lecture on your favorite privacy laws. If you'd like to talk about them, happy to do so. But I do get asked all the time, what's happening from the bill perspective and the legal framework? Do we have a federal privacy law? Well, there's been one introduced for 10 plus years. We still don't have one. One day we might. And you can kind of see this chart here that shows where various bills are being introduced in the United States. And while there are a few that are red, which is signed and in action, you can see from the blue that there's a lot of activity. So whether or not they're passed this year, the idea that they will be passed likely in future years is inevitable. And some people say, are we going to have a 50-state framework? And there's a high chance we might have a significant number of state framework. In the data breach land, we have one for every state, including the territories. So there's 52 that you have to contend with, and we'll just have to manage down that path. So what does all this mean for marketers? Well, the very first piece is you have to know your data. You have to know what you are collecting, how you collected it, what do you use it for? What purpose? Is it for email? Is it for tracking? Is it for sharing? Is it for leads? Is it for verification? Is it for fraud? Is it for a digital ad? Is it for social media? You also have to know where it's stored, and then who do you share it with? This is going to help you set the floor, the foundation for you to be able to comply with any of the privacy laws, but then also the other requirements that we're going to talk about, like a privacy notice, a cookie banner, the ability maybe to have privacy language as a feature on your web page, managing individual rights, like Jodi has the ability to ask a company to delete my data or to access my data or opt out. And opt out might mean, let's use email marketing as an example, not just unsubscribe me from your favorite email service provider, but also to delete me, like literally make me go away. Now think about where else you have this. A lot of times we export it to a Google Sheet or an Excel, and we share it with a contractor or an agency or other companies. All of that data counts. Anywhere where there's personal data, and personal data is your contact information, as well as all that digital data that we're talking about. So what are some common digital marketing mistakes that I often see? And then we're going to go through how do we address those. A lot of times we don't know which countries recipients are from. We don't know if they're from the EU or if they're from the United States or if they're from Canada. And that actually really matters, because then you have to kind of think about what kind of messaging are you sending to them? Do they then convert into a customer? What type of organization are you in? So we really need to know where people are from. That then helps us determine what our next steps are and our obligations. A lot of times people are confusing kind of which laws opt in, which laws opt out. That's true here in the United States if you have texting or phone calling or emailing. And then there's differences between the United States and Europe, as an example, for email or for cookies. And then you can adopt one philosophy overall. You can take the most conservative approach, but you want to kind of think through the business implications of that. So it's really important to know your data so you can know the countries, so then you can understand which ones opt out and which ones opt in. Now, this is the only place we're going to use some fancy acronyms here. So CCPA, I mentioned earlier, is the California Consumer Privacy Act. If you're not familiar, back in November, Californians voted not only for a president, but also for a new privacy law. It's called CPRA, the Consumer Privacy Rights and Enforcement Act, and it goes into effect January 2023. And Virginia got into the fun in March this year, also passing a brand new privacy law. So Virginia kind of blends CPRA with a bit of GDPR. GDPR being the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU. Now, the piece that we're going to talk about here is the idea of sold and shared. And a lot of times people will say, oh, I don't sell any data. And that might be very true. You might not actually sell any data. Like, I sold it for $1. However, what happens is in a marketing context, if you share data, and actually, let's use the definition here. These are the actual definitions out of the text. And so I'm going to explain them, but you'll always have them here. The idea of selling is you could give information to a third party, and the third party can use it for their own purpose. And in that scenario, there's valuable consideration that's transpired, and it very well can be a sale of data. Think about going to an event and the sponsor gets all the emails. You didn't sign up for it. It's just a benefit of what the sponsor gets. They get the whole list. Now the sponsor contacts you. That was likely a sale of data. In the ad tech space, a lot of the ad tech nowadays is very much considered a sale of data. CPRA introduces this concept of sharing and the idea that you might share data for cross-contextual advertising purposes. So what's going to happen is now we have requirements for do not sell. Go to the bottom of your favorite website. You might notice a do not sell my personal information link, a requirement under the California law. Soon you'll start seeing a do not share my personal data link as well. So you need to be thinking about, how would I manage cross-device tracking? How would I be able to manage Jodi to be able to opt out of that? So as you're building your programs over the next period of time, you want to kind of think about what these new future laws are going to mean. And there's a lot that we could talk about in those laws. We're not going to dive super deep in those today, but certainly happy to at another point. I'm sure you've heard the news. Apple's making headlines these days with their app 14.5 iOS rollout. But we also know that Google and Firefox are joining the fray in not allowing cookies in a go-forward basis for tracking purposes. So what does that mean? We have to figure out what to do in a cookieless world. Well, it's all still possible. Digital marketers can still reach customers and prospects and comply with privacy laws. So what should we be doing? Well, the very first question, I believe, is to ask, can I use this data? This is very much going to be from a law perspective. You want to think about, what does the privacy law say? You also have to look at your notice. What does your privacy notice say? Does it say you can or you can't? What about your contracts? Does the contract prohibit you from being able to use this data? So you're going to answer yes or no. When you get to no, well, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board. But if you answer yes, then you want to be thinking about, should you use this data or shouldn't you use this data? And this goes back to that kind of fancy scratch your head test that I talked about. Because when a customer gets a message that they're not expecting, then they're going to question, how did I get it in the first place? And then they're going to wonder, well, who is this brand and why are they using my information in this capacity? So we want to be marketing responsibly. There's so many different places that we're marketing, and we have to think through all of them. What does it mean on social media versus email marketing? What does it mean if I do a targeted ad? What does it mean if I actually send you something in the mail? Am I expecting that? How is it that I keep getting all these catalogs from places I've never heard of before, but they really seem to know that I like these topics? Right? Where did that information come from? So we have to be marketing responsibly and kind of thinking about where all of this data is coming from. And the messaging might need to be a little bit different. And what is it we're asking them to do? We don't want to shout. We want to build relationships, right? The job here is to be able to create a relationship with our customers. Oftentimes we're focused on how many numbers do we have? How many emails? How many people clicked my ad? How many impressions do I have? What we really want are conversions, but not just conversions. They're people on the other end. They're humans on the other side of the computer screen who are being convinced that our product and service is going to fill their need, going to help them in some way, or they just have to have it because it's the most amazing item that they need or service that's going to help fulfill their goals, whether personally or professionally. And in that transaction, I've talked about this idea of trust. It's the idea of being able to really establish a relationship on trust that you're going to fulfill on the promise that you're making, and also that you're going to do right by their data. How can we do this? Privacy and marketing messaging is one of the key places. So think about privacy as a feature of a product or service. Oftentimes, especially in technology, you're going to see all the different fabulous features of this product or service. And privacy is now being often listed as one of them. Now, one thing I will add is I actually was shopping for some new technology for my business and noticed that in the models, as you go upstream, is when you get the more security. I would offer, and I know this isn't always the right audience, but you might have a part to that conversation that we don't really want to have security. Like I have to pay more money to get more secure data because as a business owner or as a company, I want to make sure that you're going to appropriately protect my data. So when I see security kind of upstream, it makes me wonder, well, does that mean you're not doing a really good job of securing the data on the front end? And I might not buy the product. I might go to the competitor who already has it at the base level that I'm looking for. But using privacy as a feature of the product and service is an essential item. And this can come up in a variety of places. It can just be a technology piece. I know many vendors and service providers who are looking at their competition saying, oh my gosh, I have to have this because they have it over there and I'm working with large companies. And if I don't have it, they're just going to skip over me. If you're in the health arena or financial, think about a B2C environment. Am I going to give you all of this data if I don't feel really comfortable with what you're going to do with it? I need to feel comfortable. Now, one of the ways you also can do this is a privacy portal. Now, Microsoft, I think, does a really nice job. Now, if you're a smaller company, that's okay. I think you can still model off of what they've done because they've made it very visual. You can go to the privacy page, which is really a privacy section of intertwined pages. But even if you just had one page, one single web page, that was extremely visual. Here's what I collect. Here's what I use. Here's how we care about privacy in our company. Here's any security certifications we've received. Here's what our privacy notice is. Here's how you can manage any individual rights. It's an extremely visual experience. It's a one kind of stop for me to get all the privacy information. Even if you send me off to other pages, it's still a single place for a privacy portal for a consumer or business to go with questions. And the language we can use is to consider the objections. Why might I not sign up for your product and service? Am I not sure how you're going to use this information? Because if we don't get accurate information and alleviate their concerns, we're going to get bad information. And then you're going to be making decisions off wrong information, which will really skew all of our metrics. So instead, let's alleviate any of their concerns so that they feel comfortable to be able to provide the data that we truly need. And at that point, we're then creating and beginning to establish that strong relationship. Additionally, you'll have in a privacy kind of preference center, you'll be able, that we're going to talk about soon, that can also be part of your privacy portal. Let's talk a little bit about cookies. I kind of mentioned the opt-in versus opt-out. So generally speaking, there is some exceptions, and one of those being what's called a strictly necessary cookie, because not all cookies are created equal. But for your advertising and analytics cookies, cookie banners should be explicit opt-in, and the cookie should fire after the user hits accept. You don't want cookie banners to be blocking the site, and you don't want it to be a condition of using the site. And please, 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 please consider the mobile experience. I personally, I'm sure many of you have as well, we've gone to websites before and we're on our phone and we can't get to where we want to because the cookie banner's over the whole thing. There's like no X, and I'm just kind of stuck here. So you really want to look at the user experience. And there's so many different tools out today that you can really customize the language, the look and feel of what that's going to look like, make it your own with personal branding. And in the United States, cookie banners do not need to be an explicit opt-in. And what I will also offer is you should not have a cookie banner that says accept without reject or manage your settings right next to it. Because if all I have is accept, I didn't actually accept, because accept is like, yes, I'm okay with that. But if I'm not okay with that, you haven't given me a choice. So you want to understand the way you're using a cookie banner here in the United States and really make sure that the language is connected to what you're trying to accomplish and is meaningful to the end consumer. Also keeping in mind that in the United States, cookies can be considered a sale of data, and you might then trigger the sale of data requirements. And fast forward in 18 months, we're going to have the share requirements as well. So just kind of keep those antennas up a little bit. What's going to happen in our opt-in world on apps? Well, there is an expectation it's going to drop significantly. And what can marketers do about that? Well, there's going to be other identifiers that are going to come on the market. This is a place for you to really use language to be able to gather more first-party data. But keeping in mind, the more first-party data you have, you need to make sure that you can protect that data, because we don't want to increase our security risk by helping our marketing efforts. We want to help our marketing efforts and alleviate any type of security risk. So making sure that we have strong security protocols are going to be really important. One of the other Apple's requirements is a kind of nutrition label. And if you kind of look at this concept of a nutrition label, we might see that it's going to probably cascade outside just the app world. And it's a really visual representation. And I hope to see more websites adopt this as well, because it's a way for someone to really cue in on what kind of data is being collected, how it's being used. Here, we're obviously talking about kind of like tracking and linking, but the whole idea is a very easy way, not the long privacy notice that I actually do write, but a very easy way for someone to understand what's happening. Now, how are we going to move from cookies to identifiers? Well, some of the ways are digital fingerprinting, demographic attributes, browsing histories, statistical modeling. We're going to have some new future era. It was kind of like part one. Now we're moving into part two. And what's important is to not forget everything we've learned from cookies and opt-in and being transparent and choice, but to apply those here to make it so that we can still accomplish what we're trying to, which is to connect and deliver valuable targeted content and messaging to our audience, but with a privacy-first philosophy. You'll have to keep in mind where you are, EU versus US, Canada, and of course, around the world. And around the world, more countries are adopting more of an EU approach as opposed to a US approach. So the US we're moving upstream, but we're still very much kind of an opt-out, inform me of what you're doing and provide me some choices, with the exception of children. If anyone here works with children, we didn't cover that specifically here, but anyone working with children, make sure that you have a privacy professional working with you inside your organization or outside who's familiar with the children's laws. So again, kind of thinking about as we move from cookies to identifiers, we just want to maintain that same privacy principles: notice, choice, and that establishment of trust, because that's what's going to give you the competitive edge in your industry or your environment. We can build trust through a privacy notice. This is actually the place to communicate. It's often thought of as, oh, it's that legal document. I have to have that link somewhere in a website. Let me make sure I have it. But actually, it's really a place, I've seen some companies have some fun with it, but it's the place to explain what it is that we're doing. And this is where I really think a summary at a minimum, have some hyperlinks to the sections of your notice, but really think about how can you evolve this to be a place where you're communicating with summaries, with visuals, and then of course the long notice that is necessary to comply with different privacy laws. I wanted to kind of help explain, because as marketers, we want to collect all kinds of data. We want to use it for all types of purposes that we might not quite know yet. And under CPRA, as well as actually the new Virginia law, the movement is to go to making sure that we're collecting information and we have a business purpose. So going back to when I said we have to know our data, we're going to have to know our data. And just like in the EU, we're going to have to document what our purpose is and why we're using it. That, of course, is also going to be used in our privacy notice. That can be used in your language when you're explaining to Jodi, the customer, why I need this information. And we also want to make sure that we're adopting this concept of data minimization. The philosophy is you collect what you need, and that's what you protect. We don't collect what we don't need because it increases the risk to the individual and, of course, from a security point of view. Now, let's talk about opt-in. So we talked a lot about first-party data. We want to opt in. What do some opt-in requirements need to look like, especially for those in the EU? Or if you're going to actually have a true opt-in and you want it to count as consent, we don't want pre-ticked boxes. More time and time again, it's being moved to no pre-ticked boxes. We want to really be specific. It should not be a condition of service. It must be easy to withdraw, and we always want to link to a privacy notice. Now, I've opted in. Maybe I haven't opted in. Somehow I'm on the list, and you want to realize, you know what? I just don't want 5 emails a day from my favorite company, but I don't want to lose touch with them. A preference center is a great way for an individual to be able to exercise their choice. And it's a downgrade model. So think about, and actually, you can even collect more information from them. You'll hear what they really want to know about. And when you know that, you can deliver messaging to them that's going to actually be relevant, that they're going to click on. Your email marketing rates might go up. Your conversion rates in other areas might go up. If you know your audience better, you can actually make more relevant content. So Preference Center is actually a great place to be able to get the actual information that you're looking for. Now, in this scenario, I just have the ability to kind of explain how much I want to receive the content. But other ones, there's the ability to really tailor the type of content. So I encourage you to at least start with something like this, not a one-click unsubscribe, but more of a downgrade model in some type of preference center. And you can then move upstream. You can connect all the type of digital marketing into like a universal consent management tool. And with that, you can start to build these preference centers out. So what should an action plan be? I like to think about privacy with all of these different modules. Now, you might not be responsible for all of these, but it's important to understand how they all go together. So you might have policies in the company that you have to adhere to. We need to have an assessment and understand what kind of data we're collecting. Are we collecting precise geolocation? That, in a new world, will be opt-in only and considered a sensitive data element with a string of requirements to it. A data inventory, we've talked about that. The ability for individual rights, vendor management. Anytime we're sending data to that cloud vendor and it's personal data going to them, we're responsible as a company to make sure that that vendor is compliant. You might remember the very first slide that I had talking about why privacy matters for customers, investors, and vendors. We need to make sure that our vendors are complying with the laws and will be able to help support us in our privacy program. Security, we want to make sure all of our data is protected. Everyone should be trained on what their role is related to privacy. And then the idea is this is rinse and repeat. Many of these might be kind of first-time activities for some companies, but then we need to figure out how do we maintain it. And especially how do we maintain it so that when another state comes along and passes a privacy bill, it won't be a massive uplift. It'll just be one more item and we'll be well on our way to being able to comply with that. So some of the areas that you might want to be thinking about, review your email marketing strategy. Where are you buying a list? Where does the list come from? How did these people get on it in the first place? Do you know which countries are being targeted and the legal requirements? Evaluate your opt-in consent experience. Consider implementing a preference center to include those downgrade options, maybe even a consent management tool to think about all the places that you have consent. Keep up with the data flow, what you're collecting, using, sharing. Focus on that first-party data strategy. Use privacy-first messaging to encourage individuals to opt in and share accurate personal data. Follow the advancements of what's happening with Google's FLoC, with Apple, global privacy control. Global privacy control is kind of today's version of do not track if you were around for that, but basically at the browser setting where you'd be able to manage your opt-out, and then each website will have to listen to that setting. And then, of course, stay tuned for future privacy laws. So, in summary, I hope that you realize privacy is an opportunity to engage with customers. Through that, we can build long-lasting relationships that are built on trust, and companies who pay attention to privacy will have a competitive edge. Fun fact, if you like podcasts, I have a podcast with my husband. She said privacy, he said security. Learn all about it. Here's a special website. Grab the slides, and I've also created a really cool quiz if you'd like to learn a little bit more about your privacy posture and figure out what big mistake might be costing you. And at this time, I hope I still have some room for questions. Just going to give a moment to see if we have any other questions come through. What do I know about privacy laws in Canada? Okay, that is a great question. So there are a couple laws in Canada, and it actually depends on the industry that you're in and the province. So there's kind of a national Canadian law, much like there is sort of for GDPR, but it's much older. Though it's called PIPEDA, though Canada is actually looking at a GDPR-like bill. It'll probably be a couple years away. And then CASL is, and I see someone else has actually asked about CASL as well. So CASL is the Canadian anti-spam legislation. It is actually the strictest private anti-spam legislation in the world. And there's kind of B2C and B2B requirements. It is very much an opt-in email marketing law with a few exceptions for B2B and a few exceptions if you have an existing relationship with a customer. So there's kind of a variety of different ifs that you have to go through in that analysis, but it's very much not like CAN-SPAM here in the United States. And it is a little bit different than GDPR and actually the e-privacy directive, which is the digital marketing law in Europe. So I see someone here has a specific question around nonprofits. So with nonprofits, it is likely an opt-in for you, with the exception of those that you might already have on your list, depending on when they were on your list. So certainly one that you would kind of need to dig in a little bit deeper. And then each province also potentially has, so I see someone here has one in Ontario. Each province can also have their own privacy requirements. So kind of like states here. So like California could have theirs, but the federal government in the United States would have one. So you need to actually look at both of those. What do I recommend as the first step to getting started in privacy? The very first step is someone needs to be anointed in the privacy person in the company. And the second is going to be data. You have to know the data that you have, because you literally can't comply with any of it if you don't know what data you have. Even the very first question, if you have a data breach, is, well, what data and where is it? So the more that you have and understand the flow of data, pretend you're at a whiteboard going from left to right and be able to understand the data that you have, that's a really great starting point. And for that particular person, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I have a really nice free Excel template that you can use. Some companies, Excel's great. For some companies, we need privacy management software because it's much more complex. It just kind of depends on where you are. But even just getting started to think about those questions will get you on your way. I've noticed a lot of apps asking for cookies lately. Why is that? Is it because of the upcoming changes? So if the ask in that is to ask if they can track you across third-party sites, then yes, it is. Some apps, we're kind of doing it in preparation of the official rollout. But yes, otherwise, are apps asking for more cookies? The other is that I think you just see more apps and websites kind of using mobile app consent to comply with GDPR. And sometimes we see them here because the company has chosen to adopt the GDPR philosophy all the way over here, or the person setting it up didn't know that you could separate them by geo, which you can. So that's always kind of a fun one. And then if there's no EU impact and from the US, sometimes again, people just want the consent or they want to inform you. It kind of depends on the way the language has been set up, because you don't have to have the consent here in the United States for a privacy laws perspective, but we will to comply with Apple to be able to do the tracking. Another question. I am curious how privacy and opt-in relates to tracking pixels through something like Google Tag Manager. Is that data on user activity that is shared with Google, Twitter, Facebook considered first party or third party? It actually kind of depends on how it's being used and how it's set up. So in Google, for Google, they actually had some places where you kind of toggled and it would be restricted data. So the data that was shared back and forth was basically restricted so that it wouldn't qualify as that sale of data under CCPA. So I highly recommend you Google CCPA and you'll find the page to be able to do that. On Facebook, it's really not first party. It really is more third party. We all know that Facebook especially is using that data for their own purpose to really be able to build the algorithm up. And so under Facebook, they actually kind of created 3 different ways, and you had to actually change the code to do what they termed limited data use. And so when a user would go and opt out, it would trigger the limited data use flag depending on how you set that up within Facebook. And Facebook's really the only one I know that's done like the limited data use, but Twitter and Pinterest and all the others, they all sort of have their own flavor. And then of course there's the IAB consent framework as well. So sort of depends on which pixels that you have, but Google Tag Manager, you're still going to have to deal with like all the individual companies kind of within, because what Facebook's doing is different than what Google Ads might be doing within the Tag Manager. Thank you so much for all the fabulous questions. And thank you everyone for joining. I'd love to connect with you. Please do find me on social media. Come listen if you want more privacy and security. Come check out a fun privacy and security podcast and grab the slides and take the quiz. And thank you so much for considering privacy first and joining me today.
Jodi, can you hear me and see me?
I can.
Okay, well, perfect. I got a couple of questions as well.
Oh, great.
You can see me on the screen though.
Totally can see you. Yes.
Perfect. All right. So by the way, I did get a Starbucks and nobody was following me.
That you know of at the moment.
I don't know if you know who's following you, but he just so happens to work for Microsoft. So that was a nice setup and compliment for Microsoft. Clarify though, there's nothing in the legislation, and I'm not trying to aim for the bottom when I ask this question, but there's nothing in the legislation that requires, at least with CCPA, and the predominant laws we see coming, that requires marketers to set cookies a certain way. This is more of a UX experience where the opt-in is one thing, but the opt-in with choices, I think, is what I'm trying to clarify.
Right. So the California law requires notice at the time of collection,
Right.
at or before the time of collection. So for some websites, they've said the privacy notice is enough. For some websites, they want the cookie banner. But in terms of the choices, you don't have to have the choices at the time per the legislation. You do have to have the choices at some place. So if you're a US company and you want a US banner, I prefer not to see accept, because the word accept means like I had another choice and I didn't have another choice.
Right?
Right. So you can use, we use cookies for advertising and analytics purposes and to personalize your experience on our site. You can just say, okay. Mm. It's totally different. Like I would say, well, the law doesn't say you have to have the choices in the banner. The industry best practice is to have a link to your privacy notice, your cookie notice, or your cookie settings. It is the best practice. It's not a requirement per the law.
Agree. It's just what was making me think about this. A lot of the hosting platforms don't always offer those options, and they're even behind in doing that. So you get this one-stop shop of accepting all, as opposed to being able to pick which cookies you want, which cookies you don't. It's frustrating. A lot of those platforms, if you're a web developer, sometimes it's customization, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, even just the word like got it, understand is better than the word accept. Because if you just think about accept, like where's the reject? So, and even if it's just a link to your privacy notice that has everything about cookies, that's at least better than nothing, right? It just shows an element of trust of, you know what, I'm not trying to hide something when you do that. The number of people who are going to click on it is likely going to be very low.
So one other question, if you are an average marketer and you notice, not necessarily a breach. That's not what we're talking about, but it was kind of playing off the question you had earlier. If you're the average marketer and you're not the decision maker, you're not the CMO or the attorney or somebody at that role. And a lot of small businesses don't have a chief privacy officer.
Mhm.
Most don't. Uh, where does the average marketer need to do to ensure privacy in order to protect their company and protect the rights of the consumers that they are themselves as well?
Right. So, first, it's to figure out who is going to be the person responsible for privacy in the company. And sometimes it's marketers. I actually have many marketers who are my direct clients, but they need to know sort of who is going to be that decision maker for them, and then become familiar with the privacy laws. So if there's someone else in the company, then they need to create a strong relationship with that person so that they can get fed. Here's what you need to know about the new Virginia law, the new California law. If that person doesn't exist and they're literally all on their own, then it's time to go and seek additional help and resources to find out what is going to be applicable for you. So we need to, the IAB has a variety of resources. The Privacy Association has a variety of resources. Pick your favorite law firm, your favorite consulting firm. There's a lot of content that is out there. But as a marketer, it's important to start with that data, to be able to understand what you even are collecting, to then figure out, because the first question any privacy person is going to ask you is that, well, tell me what you're doing, because then I can tell you which law and which part of it is going to apply to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Good, great presentation. Want to answer one other question, Jeffrey? Yes, you're in the right place. That's the little bubble on the left is where you can pop in and ask questions. So, Jody, again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your excellent presentation. This is such a meaty topic that it's just crazy. We're going to be talking about this for the next 20 years, and for a lot of good reasons. So, anyway, have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining.